Okay. We are now into the 90s, the 1990-91 season, which is a great year if you're a fan of these guys, and not so much if you're a fan of teams I cheer for, because my heart's going to get broken a bunch of times by some really fantastic players. Um, the Norris division is now clearly just as solid as the Smythe, so that huge discrepancy between the two divisions is gone. And it's led by the Chicago Blackhawks at 49, 23, and 8, followed by St. Louis at 47, 22, and 11. The Detroit Red Wings at 34, 38, and 8, followed by the Minnesota North Stars at 27, 39, and 14. The only reason that Minnesota makes the playoffs is because Toronto's worse at 23, 46, and 11. So we don't have the 3-point games to hide how bad teams are, and we only have 16 out of 21 teams making it instead of the 16 out of 31 that make it now. So you're going to have some bad teams in the playoffs, and the Minnesota North Stars make it. In the Smythe division, it's won this year by the Kings, which is highly unusual to see a non-Alberta team at the top. 46, 24, and 10 is the Kings record, followed by the Flames at 46, 26, and 8, followed by the Oilers, who are 500 with 37, 37, and 6. The Canucks managed to make the playoffs at 28, 43, and 9 because they're in the same division as Winnipeg, who are 26, 43, and 11. And the Jets lose the Turtle Derby to the Canucks. And it was called that because the province had a Turtle Derby tracker where every day they would just say, okay, well, they both lost, so we're in the same position. Well, they both lost again, and it was kind of a sad display. And it really felt like neither team really cared if they made the playoffs. And I know that's not what it was, but that's how it felt at the time. The Boston Bruins win the Adams division with a 44, 24, and 12 record, followed by the Montreal Canadiens at 39, 30, and 11. So Boston's still the top team in the East, and I was getting kind of a big head about it. Like, yeah, we're going to win it now. It's good. Edmonton's done, so we're going to make it. We're going to win it. No. Buffalo 31, 30, and 19, followed by Hartford at 31, 38, and 11, and Quebec with a 16, 50, and 14 record. Show that you can't have just one bad season in a row. You got to have at least a couple. And it's a disaster. Pierre Pagé is not in a good position. The Canadian dollar's in bad shape. He's got a crappy roster, and then at the draft, it's actually going to get worse. The Pittsburgh Penguins win the Patrick division with a pedestrian-looking 41, 33, and 8 record when you look at the other division winners, followed by the Rangers at 36, 31, and 13, the Capitals 37, 36, and 7. The Devils make the playoffs with a 32, 33, and 15 record. However, the Flyers at 33, 37, and 10 don't. So if you want to talk about the best teams making it, not the best teams making it, this is another one of those years. The Patrick, that it seemed like there was at least one team that got hosed and didn't get a playoff spot every year. The New York Islanders, however, another poor record for them at 25, 45, and 10. So 60 points for them that season, and just in general, not a great year. June 16th, 1990, Joey Mullen is traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins by the Calgary Flames. Kind of a key move there. September 4th, 1990, Montreal Canadiens trade Claude Lemieux to New Jersey for Sylvain Turgeon. So if you want to talk about trades that Montreal lost, you can start with this one and work your way from there. It's a tradition that goes back decades, and that's a bad one. And I understand that Claude Lemieux may not have been entirely popular with some, but Sylvain Turgeon, I don't know. They must have seen something there with Turgeon's game that other people didn't see. Because even at the time, it was like, really? They traded for, really? Because Lemieux gave you so much sandpaper and so much of that factor you need in the playoffs, and Turgeon just didn't. Turgeon had a 30-goal season along the way, and he had some seasons where he looked pretty good, but no. Turgeon's going to end up in Ottawa. December 11th, 1990, the Minnesota North Stars trade Larry Murphy to Pittsburgh in a deal that will benefit both teams, but losing Murphy does hurt Minnesota's blue line. March 4th, 1990, Ron Francis is traded to Pittsburgh by the Hartford Whalers. So if you want to talk about moments where the Whalers made a mistake, that's a big one. Although at the time, I will defend Hartford on this term, John Cullen was seen as being a pretty solid prospect. He was a good young forward, and he was a guy who was seen as a 100-point scorer. Sure, he can get to 100, and at the time they were making themselves younger, so it was seen as a smart move. March 31st, 1990, Chris Nyland gets into the record book with 10 penalties in one game. 6 of those are minors. 2 of those are majors. 1 is a 10-minute misconduct, and 1 of them is a game misconduct. So, and it's a record that many felt maybe he got because he wasn't happy. He was a Bruin at the time. He'd been a Montreal Canadian his whole career, so going over to Boston must have been weird. Well, no, I know he ended up with the Rangers too. It may have been after or before the. Anyways, original 6. On October 26th of 1990, Wayne Gretzky gets point number 2,000. And the only one that he was slower getting to that other 1,000 points than was himself. So the record for the fastest from point 1 to 1,000 is Wayne Gretzky. The fastest to get to a different 1,000 points is also Wayne Gretzky. It's from 1,001 to 2,000. June 5th of 1990, Brett Hull wins the Hart Trophy. His 86-goal season helped him do that. And he and his father Bobby are the first ever father-son duo to win the Hart Trophy. So that's pretty massive if you're a fan of the Hulls at all. And if you've watched my video about how Batman was behind it all, you know about the Bobby Hull, the connection is there. Just look into it. Make sure your hat's made of tinfoil before you look. The Hart Trophy goes to Brett Hull, as I stated. The Art Ross goes to Gretzky, because of course it does. The Norris Trophy goes to Ray Bourque. The Calder goes to Eddie the Eagle Belfour, who was a huge star at the time. Everybody loved Belfour. And Belfour wins the Jennings and the Vezina. The Selke goes to Dirk Graham, also of the Chicago Blackhawks. So nice haul for the Chicago Blackhawks. The Adams Trophy for Coach of the Year goes to Brian Sutter of the St. Louis Blues. The Lady Byng goes to Wayne Gretzky. The Masterton and the King Clancy Award both go to Dave Taylor. So as Dave Taylor's on his way out of the league, the NHL's saying, you know, you've done a very good job and you've been an inspiration to people. And it almost feels like sometimes with some of these veteran players that win these awards that the NHL almost feels like it's wrong these guys didn't win awards, didn't win trophies, so they want to make it up to them. And Taylor's one of those guys. Dave Taylor's one that you may not be able to make a strong argument that he belongs in the Hall of Fame, but he played so long and he played so well too. So you could make that argument. Pearson Award goes to Hull as well. The Patrick for growing the game in the States goes to Rod Gilbert and Mike Ilitch, the owner of the Detroit Red Wings at the time. The number 1 draft pick, and this is where things get worse for Quebec temporarily, goes to Eric Lindros. Lindros plays 760 games in his injury-shortened career, 372 goals scored, 493 assists, 865 points. Plays for Philly, the Rangers, Toronto, and Dallas. And at the time he plays for Toronto and Dallas, this is when concussions have really done a number on him, and he's not the player that he was. And it's too bad because, if you take that part of things out, if he doesn't have to deal with all those injuries, you're likely looking at a guy who ends up with probably about 1,200 games played and probably about 1,300 points. And then we won't have the argument about whether or not he really earned a spot in the Hall of Fame, but that argument is there. I'm fine with him being in the Hall because Cam Neely and Pavel Bure are in the Hall. And as soon as they got in, then yeah, you have to put Lindros in as well. Because up until then, there was a number of guys who had kind of injury-shortened careers. You go, well, if they played longer, they would have... Well, guess what? Now that's not a thing. The playoffs. So let's get into my heart getting broken here. Boston beats Hartford in 6. Montreal beats Buffalo in 6. So it's Boston and Montreal again. Pittsburgh beats New Jersey in 7. Washington beats the Rangers in 6. It's Pittsburgh and Washington. Minnesota beats Chicago in 6. St. Louis beats Detroit in 7. So it's Minnesota and St. Louis. LA beats Vancouver in 6, and I remember that series well because I remember feeling like Vancouver didn't really have a chance right out of game 1. And yet they were close at one point, and then there was a goal. I remember a goal by Gretzky that kind of broke my heart, and then, of course, they ended up winning it. Edmonton beats Calgary in 7. So the Battle of Alberta is in the first round this year as their second and third rated team, and it is an upset as the 500 team in Edmonton beats the one that had 100 points in Calgary. So this is your standard Battle of Alberta, you don't know what might happen kind of thing, but Edmonton gets the last laugh again. The conference finals now. Pittsburgh beats Boston in 7, and I remember going into that series and saying, well, we're not going to see Pittsburgh win this. I remember being all cocky in my high school about how this was clearly going to be, Boston's going to go to the final, and Edmonton won't beat them again. It's not going to happen again. This is our year. Pittsburgh's not going to beat Boston. Pittsburgh's never beaten anybody. Oh, yeah, and then Pittsburgh won it in 6, and I felt kind of gutted. So Pittsburgh takes them out. Minnesota makes me happy. Minnesota takes out the Oilers. So the Oilers, who were 500, and Minnesota, who had no business being here, 68 points during the regular season, no business being in this position at all. They win in 5. They take the Oilers out, and the Cinderella story continues. But here's the problem with Cinderella stories. The clock almost always strikes midnight on these teams. And in this case, it has to be against Pittsburgh. So let's track back here. The Canucks, who were my favorites at the time, still are, lose to the Kings in the first round. So that's Gretzky. Boston, my team in the East, right? They get taken out by Lemieux. The Stanley Cup Finals now, it's Minnesota. That's my last bastion of hope. And they're against Mario Lemieux. Minnesota wins Game 1 in Pittsburgh 5-4. I felt good. I was like, all right, Game 1, good. We got home ice. We're good. Pittsburgh then rattles off a win in Game 2, 4-1, but Minnesota wins Game 3, 3-1. So again, it's like, wow, they're 2 games away from being the first sub 500 team to win a Stanley Cup since the 60s. This is insane. I think it was 61, wasn't it? The Hawks? Anyways, the last sub 500 team to win the Stanley Cup was ages before this. We'll go that way. But in Game 4, Pittsburgh wins in Minnesota 5-3. So I'm like, okay, it's 2-2 tie series. All right. Game 5, Pittsburgh wins 6-4. So Game 6 is going to be in Minnesota. All right, as long as they win in Minnesota, oh my God, what's happening? I remember by the end of Game 6 just feeling like somebody ripped my heart out and just stomped on it. And it was these guys. So if you want to talk about, and people ask me like, well, why do you hate Pittsburgh so much? The stomping in Game 6 was just horrifying. And again, Minnesota had no business being there with a 27-39-14 record. But it just seemed heartless. It was heartless. It really felt that way. I was not a happy camper. For a while after that, I was kind of inconsolable because, in reality, yeah, Minnesota didn't really deserve to win a Stanley Cup. But now I'd watched Lemieux beat Boston and Minnesota after I'd watched Gretzky beat Vancouver. So I really wasn't happy that whole spring was rough for me. Playoff goal leaders, Stevens was 17. So Kevin Stevens, who was kind of a, I don't want to say flash in the pan, but my God, he was fantastic this season. And it looked like he was going to be this big, tough power forward who's going to score 50 goals forever. Your assist leader was Mario Lemieux. Lemieux also leads in points with 44. So Lemieux had a Gretzky-type spring that year. Your Conn Smythe winner is, of course, Mario Lemieux. Who else would it go to? Your wins leaders, Jim Casey and John Casey with 14 for the Minnesota North Stars. Tom Barrasso with 12. So when you talk about who else would have gone to, Barrasso, maybe. Barrasso was seen as a bigger MVP candidate for Pittsburgh than will be remembered by history books. And the fact that he only got 12 of the 16 wins because Frank Pietrangelo got the other ones. It's a storyline that Pittsburgh will repeat later with Fleury and Murray, where you need somebody to step in, and they do, and then it looks like your goaltenders are your MVPs. So there was a similar storyline here, but really the way that Stanley Cup final worked out, it made it clear that Mario Lemieux was the best player in the game at the time. Even though your Art Ross winner is Gretzky, your Hart and Pearson winner is Brett Hull. But in the playoffs, when the games are most important, St. Louis went out in the second round. So did LA. Pittsburgh wins the Stanley Cup. So there you go. The 1990-91 season, and your winners are the Penguins. And that's the first of what will be 5 Stanley Cups for them overall. They have been the best organization in hockey over the last almost 30 years now, which is surprising considering when you look at the history videos, Pittsburgh didn't look like the best of anything before this season took place. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.